goods in Northern Ireland. My name is Jack Semple and I'm Secretary of the Engineering and Machinery Alliance, or EMA. I'm especially grateful to the MTA, one of our members, for providing back office support for this webinar. So thanks, James, Katie and Nicola. Could I, housekeeping if I could, first of all, could I ask everybody to mute themselves, and you by all means switch off your video as well. If you'd like, you might find that gives you a better broadband, but at any rate, mute. There may be an opportunity to unmute later on during discussion. Please do use the chat function either to make a comment or to put a query. So there's a lot of people on the call, but we're keen to have as much engagement as we can. We have two speakers to begin with. We have Eleanor Patterson from HMRC, and also supporting her on VAT issues in the Q&A will be Phil Crawley. And we have Charlotte Dicken, who's a Senior Policy Advisor at the Business Department, BEIS, who's been supported by Terry Boniface, who's Assistant Director, Electronics and Machinery, and a great contact for EMA, whom we work with very positively. The slides will be available to people attending this webinar at the end of the webinar if you wish, but just with one caveat that they are time dated as being accurate as of this webinar. As with everything else, things can change. Northern Ireland obviously is a hugely political issue and a very important one, a very current one. And I was interested to see a very good debate in the Commons just last Thursday, where it was stressed how that the position is unique in the world in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol. But that's not what we're here to discuss. We're here to discuss the practical business issues. And so if I could ask Eleanor to kick off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share my screen so I can share a presentation with you. So if you could just bear with me just for a second while I get that set up. Okay, I hope everybody can now see my screen and the presentation that's on there.
So I think so.
Good. So what I'll take you through today is a summary overview of the Northern Ireland Protocol and what that means for the movement of goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, with a focus on talking about the at-risk determination process, although I will cover some other aspects as well. Some of this I hope will be a refresher for people on joining this session today. As already been introduced, a colleague from our VAT team is also joining us and can answer any specific questions about how VAT interacts with these processes as well. So just as a very short intro, the Northern Ireland Protocol, as many of you know, came into effect on the 1st of January 2021. It was actually agreed as part of the withdrawal agreement with the EU back in January 2020, and it covers a wide range of elements around trade in and with Northern Ireland. And from a customs perspective, this is all very much focused on avoiding the imposition of a hard border on the island of Ireland and the impact and burden and changes to trade that would include. One of the things to remember about the protocol is that it is not a permanent solution. It does have to be renewed every 4 years by a vote of the Northern Ireland Assembly, and we are expecting the first of those votes to take place in 2024. So in terms of just thinking about customs, what the protocol does is to create a very unique situation. It resolves this issue of not having a hard border across the island of Ireland by actually creating a kind of a dual system in Northern Ireland, where Northern Ireland is part of the UK's customs territory and remains part of the United Kingdom, but at the same time achieves that no controls across the island of Ireland by applying the Union Customs Code and EU goods regulation. And it is this duality of what we have in Northern Ireland that creates the complexity that we see in the rules that surround the movement of goods, and a lot of the other things that sit alongside that. What it also does is it delivers unfettered access for Northern Ireland businesses to the whole of the UK market. And when we talk about unfettered access, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the movement of goods from Northern Ireland into the rest of the UK. The protocol also ensures that there are no tariffs charged on goods that remain within the UK customs territory, and ensures that businesses can benefit from the UK's new free trade agreements with other countries. So I will talk about this in terms of goods flows, because that, in terms of how customs and the different processes work, this is the easiest way to look at the operation of the protocol. So in line with the commitments of the protocol, what it means is that there is no hard border across the island of Ireland, no infrastructure, no checks or processes, and no customs and duties and tariffs are due, which means that goods moving between Northern Ireland and the EU, we show Ireland as the on the graphic because that's the simplest part of the EU to show, but actually it applies to movements of goods directly between Northern Ireland and all parts of the EU. Don't need to have any customs processes or tariffs applied. There are no checks. It works exactly the same way as when the UK was still part of the EU. And the VAT on goods for goods movements between Northern Ireland and the EU remains treated as an intra-EU movement. So moving to the next sort of section of this, we'll look at the Northern Ireland to Great Britain. And this is where we talk, as I said, about unfettered access. And what unfettered access means is that for the vast majority of goods that move from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, it continues to operate exactly as it did before the protocol came into effect. So there are no customs declarations, no safety and security declarations, no checks, no tariffs. There are some limited exceptions to that were agreed with the EU. And in these limited cases, then export declarations are required for the goods to move out of Northern Ireland into Great Britain. There is a list of specific types of goods where this is required, and these are types of goods which are subject to international conventions, which requires additional monitoring and regulation around their movement. So it includes things like Kimberley diamonds, CITES goods, which is the trade in endangered species, and also things like ozone depleting gases. So quite specific things that have a lot of other controls around their movement. The current approach we have to unfettered access is part of a phased approach to the implementation of unfettered access. At the moment, unfettered access is drawn widely, and it applies to all goods that are in free circulation in Northern Ireland. The government has committed that there will be a second phase to unfettered access, where the unfettered access benefits are drawn more widely around, more closely around businesses that are actually based in Northern Ireland and carry out their business in Northern Ireland. So we don't yet have details of what that will look like, but it's just to note that there will be a second phase in unfettered access that will draw this definition more tightly and will seek to protect Northern Ireland industries and business sectors from any potential for goods entering the United Kingdom through using Northern Ireland as a backdoor. So the largest amount of change, and the area where I will focus most, is around the GB to Northern Ireland movements. So what the protocol does mean is that for goods moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, import declarations are required, and also safety and security declarations. These are all administered by HMRC and Border Force, and they are used for a variety of purposes, including ensuring that tariffs are not paid on internal UK trade. And also customs declarations play a significant part in ensuring regulatory compliance. So as you will probably be familiar with, this is accomplished through using electronic declarations. The government has put in place a system called the Trader Support Service. This is an externally contracted service that provides both education and support to businesses, but also makes both the safety and security declarations and the import declarations on behalf of businesses into HMRC systems. It is a free to use system, and as I'm sure you'll be aware, it has been continuing to develop its range of different things that it offers throughout this first 6 months of the year, and will continue to do that. It has recently brought up on some additional new functionality that we can touch upon later on in the presentation, and is continuing to increase both the capacity and expertise of its support staff, but also the functionality that's available through its platform. So moving on, the main part of what I wanted to focus on today is tariffs, because tariffs is the area of the protocol where there tends to be the most detail and the most complexity. So when we're thinking about tariffs in the protocol, we're thinking about the concept of goods being at risk. And broadly, where goods are at risk, then the EU tariff applies to the movements. And where goods are not at risk, if it's a movement of goods from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, then no tariff applies, because that is an internal movement within the UK. And if it's goods imported to Northern Ireland from rest of world, then they are not at risk, then the UK tariff applies. So this helps just to kind of set the context of where we are. And when we're thinking about the application of tariffs, we're thinking about what are the options available to businesses, particularly focused on moving goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, to mitigate any tariff liability that may apply. So there's a number of things that we can look at. So there is a waiver that can be claimed. Businesses have the option to declare their goods not at risk of onward movement into the EU. A business can also access the UK-EU trade agreement in order to use the preferential rates that are available within that. Because we're using the trade agreement in this context as if the goods were moving into the EU, goods need to meet UK origin requirements in order to benefit from the trade agreement. However, if goods do meet UK origin requirements, so they are UK origin, then when they're moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, they're able to access the preferential rates in the trade agreement, and that means that no tariff would be applied, whatever the destination of the goods once they reach Northern Ireland. And there are also customs reliefs and special procedures that can be used to mitigate tariffs as well. So, for example, return goods relief is very beneficial for supply chains that involve the movement of goods from the EU into Great Britain and then onwards into Northern Ireland. Return goods relief can be used to mitigate a tariff that would otherwise apply on the movement into Northern Ireland. And customs special procedures can also be used to suspend duty. So, for example, customs warehousing for distributors or inward processing relief for those businesses involved in manufacturing goods can also be used to keep goods in duty suspension while they're in Northern Ireland, which means that they then may be able to be either returned to Great Britain or exported to rest of world, and we never have to consider whether those goods are having to pay the EU's tariff. So I will look at some of those areas in a little bit more detail. So when we're talking about whether goods are at risk or not at risk, there's a number of concepts that we need to kind of work through on that. As I've already said, where goods are at risk, the EU duty is charged, and not at risk, there is no duty if the goods are coming from Great Britain, or the UK duty if it's from rest of world. And this criteria was set out and agreed with the Joint Committee back in December of last year. What it says is that there are certain categories of goods that are automatically at risk. So these are goods are at risk in all circumstances, and that is goods that are subject to commercial processing in Northern Ireland and where the additional processing criteria is met, and goods imported from rest of world countries where the EU duty is greater than the UK duty by more than 3%. So that first category we will come on to look at in a little bit more detail around commercial processing, because the commercial processing impacts of the at-risk decision is an area that has particular impact, and it does mean that in many cases businesses who are involved in any kind of processing activities in Northern Ireland, their goods will be at risk on entry to Northern Ireland, and that's where we need to look at kind of other options to mitigate tariffs, such as the use of things like customs special procedures. So then there are goods that can be declared not at risk, and goods can be automatically not at risk in there's a category that can be not at risk due to applicable tariffs, and this is where the UK duty is equal to or higher than the EU duty. Now, if you've got a rest of world import to Northern Ireland, that's a simple comparison between whatever the UK duty rate is and the EU duty rate. However, when we're talking about a GB to NI movement, there is no UK duty, so this will only apply where the EU tariff is zero. However, if there are goods where the EU tariff is zero, then they can automatically be declared not at risk when they're moved into Northern Ireland from Great Britain. And then there are goods which can be declared not at risk under the UK Trader Scheme. And this applies to goods that are for sale to or final use by end consumers in Northern Ireland. They need to be declared by a trader who's authorised under the UK Trader Scheme, and the goods must not be subject to an EU trade defence measure. So goods that are subject to an EU trade defence measure cannot be declared not at risk under the UK Trader Scheme. So coming back to look at commercial processing then in a little bit more detail. So goods brought into Northern Ireland for processing are usually always at risk unless a business is within one of the approved processing criterias. So there's a general exemption for businesses with an annual turnover of less than £500,000 per annum. There's also a number of approved processing sectors, including the sale of food, construction, not-for-profit activities, goods for use in health and care, and final use of animal feed. Where a business is within one of these sectors, it can register for the UK Trader Scheme and therefore declare goods not at risk. We've also recently put in place an apportionment approach that businesses can use, usually when thinking about declaring goods not at risk. The business needs to know at the time that the goods enter Northern Ireland what their purpose is. So they need to know that they are for sale to or a final use by end consumers in Northern Ireland to be able to declare them not at risk. However, in many cases, there are businesses for whom some of their supplies are made, to end consumers in Northern Ireland, but they don't know at the time of the goods enter Northern Ireland which goods will go to which customers. So they might have customers right across the island of Ireland, and they don't know which customers will buy them at any time. So this is particularly useful for wholesale and distribution type businesses that supply to other businesses across the island of Ireland. So the apportionment approach allows a not a risk declaration based upon an apportionment where a business has a stable supply chain that allows it to say, well, I know that, for example, 70% of my customer base is in Northern Ireland, 30% is else in the Republic of Ireland or in the EU, and therefore I apportion my goods between at risk and not at risk on that basis. So business using this would need to notify HMRC they're using this approach and also provide evidence to support the apportionment they've used and review it on a regular basis. So on the UK Trader Scheme itself, I'm sure many people on this call will already be familiar with the scheme. It is open to businesses of all sizes and in all sectors. One thing that also worth making clear is that when we're looking at declaring goods not at risk that are for final use or end consumption by for sale to or end consumption by final users in Northern Ireland, that can also include goods that businesses bring in for their own use as well. So even if a business is, for example, a manufacturing business where the vast majority of what they bring in is used for processing and therefore cannot be declared not at risk, a business could also still register with the UK Trader Scheme and use that in respect of the supplies they bring in for their own internal use within the business that aren't part of any processing activities, and use that to declare those goods not at risk. There is no requirement to be able to declare all goods not at risk to be part of the UK Trader Scheme. It can be used selectively for certain types of goods only. So to use the Trader Scheme, a business must either be established in Northern Ireland, or if it is not established in Northern Ireland, it must have customs operations in the UK, have an indirect representation in Northern Ireland, and have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland where records are available and where goods are sold to or provided for final use by end consumers. So this latter bullet is an area where there has been a lot of challenge for businesses. A lot of businesses who supply goods in Northern Ireland and take responsibility for the declarations are not themselves located in Northern Ireland. They don't have a fixed place of business there. So we do have an easement in place currently that allows a business that doesn't have a fixed place of business in Northern Ireland to use that of their customer in order to meet the requirements for the UK Trader Scheme. Now, this is a temporary approach. It is something that is part of ongoing discussions with the EU, but at the moment it is a temporary process that's in place until the end of October this year. The other element just to cover is the waiver of the EU tariff that is possible. So in many cases, businesses are faced with having to pay the EU's tariff on their goods movements into Northern Ireland from Great Britain. Often this is associated with goods that are brought in for processing, but a business can claim a waiver. There's no requirements on different sectors or anything like that for this. It is just open and available to businesses to claim. However, the waiver does constitute state aid, and therefore it is governed by state aid limits. And this means that a business can only claim up to a maximum of €200,000 of aid over a 3-year period. There are lower allowances in some sectors. So a business who wants to claim the waiver of the EU tariff on the goods they bring into Northern Ireland can do that, but they need to keep a track of how much waiver they claim, and also if they claim any other de minimis state aid in the form of other kind of government funding or subsidies. Just towards the end of the presentation now, I will just touch briefly on special procedures and other reliefs that businesses may want to use. As I've mentioned, particularly around things like manufacturing sectors, there is often businesses who are unable to declare their goods not at risk on entry to Northern Ireland, and claiming a waiver may not always be possible. For example, businesses who receive de minimis state aid through other kinds of government subsidy may not have the availability within their de minimis cap to do this. And customs procedures and reliefs can be very helpful in mitigating the impact of the EU tariff on goods moving into Northern Ireland. So return goods relief can be accessed. The option to claim return goods relief has recently been added to the range of processes that the TSS supports. So you can make a claim to return goods relief now through the Trader Support Service. And it provides relief from customs duty for goods that are exported from the EU and then re-imported to the EU. So this can include goods that are exported from the EU, moved into Great Britain, put into free circulation in Great Britain, and then all or some of those goods are moved into Northern Ireland at a later point. There are some restrictions on what can happen to the goods that are subject to return goods relief. For example, they cannot be subject to any processing, and there's also a time limit for their claim to be made. In addition, businesses might want to think about the use of customs warehousing and/or inward processing relief. Inward processing is particularly, as I said, useful for manufacturers because it means that they can carry out processing in Northern Ireland while holding the goods in customs duty suspension, and then if they are subsequently exported to the rest of the world or returned to Great Britain, the inward processing in Northern Ireland is released, and therefore that you have never had to apply the EU's tariff that would otherwise apply. To access those authorizations, a business will have to apply for an authorization to HMRC in the normal way, and a business is also required to hold a guarantee for both customs warehousing and inward processing relief. So just very briefly to close, the use of special procedures, as mentioned, does require an authorization. This can take up to between 30 and 60 days. HMRC has recently done a lot of work to reduce the time taken to access authorizations, and this is reflected in the new timescales for authorization to be processed. And as I've mentioned, you will also need to have a guarantee in place that would cover the EU duty that would arise if the goods had to be declared at risk in Northern Ireland. So I will, that is the end of what I was going to cover today, so I will stop sharing and I will hand over to the next presenter. Thank you very much.
Thanks ever so much. Eleanor, just very briefly, Charlotte, if you could come in now to talk about business departments aspects of moving goods to Northern Ireland. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jack, and thanks, Eleanor, for that presentation. I'm just going to get the slides on the screen now. Hopefully you can all see those now, but shout if not. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Charlotte Dickin, and as Jack said, I work in the goods regulation team in BEIS, so work in the team responsible for helping businesses prepare for the introduction of the new regulatory regime for goods. So I'm going to focus on how to place manufactured goods on the market in the UK. So this will cover both the NI market and briefly the GB market, so the key timeframes here. And that's including using the UK CE marking and the UK NI marking for the Northern Ireland market. There's probably quite a lot of content on the slides. So as Jack said, I'm happy for these slides to be circulated. And at the end of this slide deck, there is a list of guidance materials as well, which should be helpful. And then just to highlight before I start, we also have some step-by-step guides that have been created for applying the UK CE marking and the UK NI marking, which I can share following the event if these haven't already been circulated. But these guides basically set out the key steps businesses need to take to place their product on both the NI market and the GB market. So I will move on. So a brief summary, this presentation focuses on new approach goods. So those kind of that use the CE marking currently. I'll really briefly summarise the rules that apply for the GB market before moving on to the NI market, which is kind of the bulk of the presentation. But I guess the first thing to be aware of is that individual goods that are already on the market before the 1st of Jan this year can continue to circulate to the end user without any further testing, and that's due to the withdrawal agreement with the EU. Secondly, for the rest of this year, for most goods, you'll also be able to use a CE marking in Great Britain. So this is again one of the transitional measures in place as we move to the full implementation of the UK CE marking for the GB market. And then thirdly, there are other transitional measures in place to support businesses, including initially being able to show the UK CE mark on a label rather than affixed directly to the product. But to summarise, all of these are heading towards the requirement for the UK CE mark to place manufactured goods on the market in Great Britain. So really quickly, we've got the UK CE marking here. It's used for Great Britain, so that's England, Wales, Scotland, not Northern Ireland. It covers most goods which previously required the CE marking and will also cover aerosol products. We'd encourage businesses to start using it now for the GB market. The essential requirements and standards remain the same for the UK CE marking as for the CE marking, and that will continue to be the case unless GB and EU rules diverge. This quickly sets out the time frame for the transitional measures, which I thought would be quite helpful to summarise briefly. So as you can see, the UK CE is already part of UK law and you can use that already. But to recap the key dates, it'll be mandatory for most products from the 1st of January 2022, and applying the UK CE marking to the product itself will become mandatory for most products from the 1st of January 2023, so you have an extra year for that. So the reason we say most products is that there are specific rules in certain sectors which you should check, and those guidance on gov.uk. So the timelines on this slide apply if you are self-declaring or using an EU notified body for conformity assessment. So it's only the case that you must already use the UK CE mark for this year if your products require third-party conformity assessment and a conformity assessment body based in the UK has been used. And then I think there's another, so on the 16th of July, so that's gone now, the new market surveillance and compliance regulation has come into force, which means you'll need to appoint an EU representative if there is no other economic operator in place when exporting to the EU or Northern Ireland. So briefly to cover the key changes to conformity assessment. So if you self-declare, you can continue to do that for the UK CE marking if you are permitted for the CE marking. But for products that require mandatory third-party conformity assessment, and this is where legislation requires external testing, because there's not an MRA between EU and UK, as you'll probably be aware, we do not recognise each other's conformity assessment bodies. So in the UK, we now call notified bodies approved bodies from the 1st of Jan this year, and this changed what they can do. And this slide kind of sets out the appropriate conformity assessment bodies for each of the 3 markets. So now I'll move on to the second and main part of the presentation, which will cover placing manufactured goods on the Northern Ireland market from a regulatory perspective. So I won't talk about customs, tariffs, or other arrangement, as Eleanor has helpfully covered these in her presentation. But goods will need to meet EU regulatory requirements to be placed on the market in Northern Ireland for as long as the protocol is in force. As Northern Ireland continues to align with EU rules, this means that CE marking continues to be the conformity marking for most new approach goods. So you will continue using the CE marking to place products on the Northern Ireland market if you self-declare or if you use an EU notified body to carry out mandatory conformity assessment. However, products which have had mandatory conformity assessment by a UK-based notified body cannot be placed on the market in the EU 27 member states. So instead, to be sold in Northern Ireland, they will need a CE plus a UK NI mark. So the UK NI marking cannot be applied alone, it needs to accompany the CE mark, and that's just to indicate that the conformity assessment has been carried out by a UK approved body rather than an EU notified body. So it's only for those goods which have undergone mandatory third-party conformity assessment by a body based anywhere in the UK. So like I said, if you self-declare, you can use the CE marking. And goods bearing the UK CA marking alone are not valid for the NI market, but the UK CA marking can appear alongside the correct markings for Northern Ireland. So you'd have the UK CA if you're supplying to the GB market, plus the CE or CE plus UK NI for the Northern Ireland market as well. So I'll quickly move on to the next slide. So because Northern Ireland is part of the UK, it's important to note that there is a separate regime for goods from Northern Ireland being placed on the market in the rest of the UK, as I've mentioned. So if you move a qualifying Northern Ireland good directly from Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK, there will be no changes, so no new customs processes for traders, but with limited exceptions, which I think Eleanor has discussed previously. So this means that qualifying Northern Ireland goods marked with a CE marking or CE plus UK NI marking can be placed in on the GB market, even if EU rules and GB rules diverge. So unfettered access only applies to Northern Ireland. Irish businesses, for example, need to follow normal processes for exporting goods to GB and complying with GB rules. So to prevent any traders seeking to abuse the system, unfettered access is accompanied in law by anti-avoidance provisions that enable action to be taken when a business looks to reroute their goods via Northern Ireland to avoid those import formalities in GB. So I think, as Eleanor touched on, the arrangements are now in force and are designed to make sure that Northern Ireland traders can continue to move their goods into Great Britain and sell them across the UK. I'll skip the slide as Eleanor helpfully covered that in further detail in her presentation. If I go on to this slide, so to clarify kind of which goods are qualifying Northern Ireland goods, so if goods were processed in Northern Ireland, they'll still qualify for unfettered access if all the components were in free circulation in the UK, but goods starting their journey in the EU will not qualify for unfettered access if they are moved through Northern Ireland into GB for avoidance purposes. So the only very limited exceptions to this approach apply where goods movement require bespoke processes, such as the requirements on the trade in endangered species, hazardous chemicals, firearms, and Northern Ireland traders placing certain highly regulated goods on the GB market need to meet minor transparency requirements in order to be placed on the GB market as a qualifying Northern Ireland good. Before I finish, just to kind of recap as with responsibilities for importers and distributors between GB and the EU, there will be different responsibilities of those in the supply chain for Northern Ireland. So if you bring goods into Northern Ireland from GB or another non-EU country and place them on the Northern Ireland market, you'll become an importer. So you'll therefore need to make sure goods are labelled with your details, amongst other responsibilities. Like I said, there is further guidance at the end of the slide deck, so I'll make sure that that is circulated after this, but I'll pause now and I think hand back for some Q&A.
Thanks very much, Charlotte, and thanks also, Eleanor. A lot of material, very clearly presented, a lot to digest, I think. Please do use the chat function if you have queries. I wonder if I could just start off. We've had several queries on VAT aspects, and I wonder if I could just ask Phil from HMRC just to cover off this aspect. What specific example? What are the implications in terms of VAT of the new arrangements for Northern Ireland? And so, for example, if I bring goods from Europe or elsewhere to GB and subsequently supply them to Northern Ireland essentially unaltered, or if they are significantly altered, what are the VAT implications, if any, as to when VAT comes due?
Thanks, Jack. So, to look at, first of all, sort of rules of origin. Rules related to rules of origin do not specifically have a VAT impact as such. So there isn't really a great deal of difference between whether the goods are unaltered or whether the goods are sort of moved work performed. And there's also sort of, I would say, a slight distinction to make between where a good is moved, say for example, from Europe to Great Britain and is then stored in Great Britain for some time, and then a subsequent sale takes place to Northern Ireland, or whether we're talking about a good that effectively transits through Great Britain, and it's sort of known at the point of departure from the EU that it will end up in Northern Ireland. So I'll try and briefly cover off both. So if it is known at the time that the goods are removed from EU to Northern Ireland, then basically, unless a transit procedure is used, the goods will be hit by a UK import VAT charge at the point of arrival in Great Britain, and will then subsequently be hit by an import VAT charge on the movement from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. If they're moved under transit, then they're effectively that first charge upon arrival in Great Britain will not land. The goods will continue under the transit procedure onto Northern Ireland and can be sort of accounted for in Northern Ireland as an intra-EU acquisition of goods. So where the recipient will account for the VAT through a sort of a reverse charge on an intra-EU movement of goods. If it isn't known, and if the goods are moved from EU to Great Britain, and then sort of 3 months later, for example, they're then sold to Northern Ireland, it is still possible to sort of avoid a double VAT charge if you move goods under a sort of another customs procedure, such as customs warehousing. So if you moved a good from EU to Great Britain under customs warehousing, you would avoid the import VAT charge, and you'd obviously avoid duty as well. And then you could then release the goods from the customs warehouse procedure at the point that that sort of the supply to Northern Ireland takes place. No VAT will be charged as the goods are being re-exported, so that goods will just have to be accounted for in Northern Ireland, and that would be done by the importer, who would generally be the recipient as well. So I hope that sort of provides a little bit of clarity on the two different possible situations. As I say, whether work is done or not is not necessarily is not a thing that really has much of a bearing in terms of VAT.
Thanks, Phil. So one query just to finish off on this area. Say machinery is returned from Northern Ireland to GB for repair. It's repaired and supplied back into Northern Ireland. Obviously, there's VAT to be charged the normal way on the work done, but is there any additional VAT in that circumstance?
So first things first, import VAT is not due on the movement of goods from Northern Ireland to Great Britain unless they are sort of moved under a sale or supply. So the default position is that there's no VAT on that movement. However, the default position going the other way is obviously that import VAT is chargeable on goods being moved from Great Britain to Northern Ireland. But if in order to avoid that charge coming to account, a business can use what's called outward processing relief when they move the goods initially from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. If they declare the goods for outward processing relief, which is another custom special procedure, that will mean that when the goods are then returned from Great Britain to Northern Ireland from Great Britain, that will only be chargeable on the actual cost of the repair and any associated freight charges.
So we've got a couple of queries in the chat just on VAT. What are the VAT implications if we are the seller in GB but goods moved directly from the EU to Northern Ireland? And that's from Ian Svensson. And Jason asks, we import from Germany, selling in the UK and Northern Ireland via distribution. Most products we make no change to. What marking is needed? Well, that's a marking question. I beg your pardon. So just on the question on VAT implications. So we're selling. We're the seller in GB, but the goods are moving directly to Northern Ireland from the EU.
So for goods moving from the EU to Northern Ireland under the protocol, as I think Ellie touched upon, they should be treated as intra-EU. So in order to be able to do that, HMRC have a sort of system that identifies all businesses that are engaged in that kind of movement, that are moving goods from an EU member state to Northern Ireland or vice versa. So the default position is that these goods should be treated as intra-EU, but in order for that to be done, in order to sort of correctly account for that, businesses, whether they be established either in Northern Ireland or in the rest of the UK, should inform HMRC of the fact that they are engaged in these sorts of transactions. Now that basically means that they will continue to appear on EU VAT systems, so that sort of sellers or people that they're engaged in transactions within the EU can adequately identify that they are operating under the Northern Ireland Protocol, and that transactions with those businesses into Northern Ireland should be treated as intra-EU. There is an online G form that businesses will need to complete and return to HMRC in order to be able to do that, and I'm happy to sort of send out the link to that sort of subsequent to this particular webinar. But yeah, the position is, if you're established in Great Britain, if you're moving goods from EU to Northern Ireland, that is an intra-EU transaction. You just need to be identified as operating under the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Thanks, Phil. Charlotte, so I see you've got several questions in the chat, some of which you've replied to, and I wondered if I could ask you just in a second to just summarise your replies and the questions. I'll highlight one question that's come in. We import our goods to GB from the EU and then resell them to both Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Can we simply indicate our name and address on accompanying paperwork? And I wondered also if you might say just a little bit more about the change this month the change at the end of the change this month and the change at the end of October, and what companies might be needing to do. And finally, if I could, question from Jeff Noon earlier on in terms of dual use goods, such as some types of machinery, are they in the category that still need an export declaration? So maybe not one for you, Charlotte, I apologise. Also, what about these goods for movement from GB to Northern Ireland? So Charlotte first, and then perhaps Eleanor.
Perfect. Yeah, happy to pick up the first question. So if you're placing a product on the EU market, you'll need to comply with EU importer requirements, and that obviously applies to Northern Ireland as well. So the importer details will need to be on the product itself. There's no transitional measures here. However, for products being placed on the GB market, there are some transitional measures on importer requirements, and I can post a link to the guidance online. But basically, for most product sectors coming from either the EEA or Switzerland, to mitigate the burden on businesses, the importer's address can be placed on accompanying documents until the 31st of December 2022, so 31st of December next year. So there are transitional measures for importer requirements in GB, but not for EU.
Right, thank you.
And then just to touch on the new market surveillance and compliance regulation. So I'm probably not the best contact in BEIS to go into too much detail about this, but obviously it's come into effect now. And therefore, if you do not have an economic operator based in the EU, so including Northern Ireland, then you will need to appoint one. So you'll need to appoint an authorised representative. So if you don't have an importer, for example, there, then you will need to appoint an authorised representative. And this is kind of for transparency purposes. But if colleagues do have any kind of more detailed questions on this, then I'm happy, and Terry's probably happy to pick these up offline and send these to the relevant contact at BEIS.
Thanks, Charlotte. And certainly, if there are further follow-up questions, we'd be more than happy to put these to HMRC or BEIS. So please come back to us. Eleanor, do you want to pick up this point about dual-use goods?
Yeah, so certainly. So dual-use goods. So for the movement of dual-use goods between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, there's actually no additional requirements. The requirements that apply to dual-use goods on import or export when going between the UK and third countries, we don't apply those between Great Britain and Northern Ireland because we don't feel that there's any requirement to do that. So if you move dual use goods from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, you don't need to do anything additional. You don't need any licenses or special documents or other kind of approvals that you might otherwise need. And the same if you move dual use goods from Northern Ireland into Great Britain, you don't need to complete export declarations. You don't need to do anything different. You can use the unfettered access provisions the same as you would with other types of goods.
Thanks, Eleanor. Can I just ask there's another question early on? Are there any implications for tools and equipment brought into the GB from Northern Ireland for specific manufacture projects and returned to Northern Ireland on completion of the project? That's one of the early questions.
Yeah. So typically what you would do if you moved tools into another country for a temporary period that were going to be used for a specific purpose and then come back again is you would use temporary admission on the way in, and then you would use return goods relief when the goods came back again. Because of the situation with the Northern Ireland Protocol, if you are a business based in Northern Ireland, you wouldn't need to do anything at all to move your tools into Great Britain because the unfettered access provisions would apply. However, you can use the return goods relief provision, which means when you subsequently move your tools back into Northern Ireland again, once whatever the use has finished in Great Britain, you will have to make a declaration, but you can use return goods relief in the way that you would in an international trade situation to mitigate any tariff impact. So you have got the benefit of that one-way return goods relief to ensure that there's no tariff impact relating to that.
Thanks, Eleanor. We've got an exchange here on the email. Charlotte, I don't know if you want to just summarise. Obviously, you've been clearing up a bit of confusion on the bit about placing on the EU market and the EU importer requirements. I don't know if you want to just summarise the reply you've put in the chat, and just to I think that's an area where clarity is always useful.
Sorry, Jet, that was just to kind of summarise what I said previously about importer requirements and the transitional measure that applies for importer details if products are coming from EEA or Switzerland onto the GB market. But the same transitional measure doesn't apply to EU, obviously.
Thank you. And you've put a helpful link in the chat as well.
Yeah.
If anybody's not looking at the chat, there's a useful link that Eleanor has added, and which we'll send round later. One query that came in, Charlotte, was does, in terms of placing goods on the market, both GB or Northern Ireland, I would guess, does it make any difference whether the company is a wholly owned subsidiary of a foreign parent, either EU or overseas?
So I will need to get back to you on that question. I think we've had that come in from a few different sources. And Jack, perhaps this is something that yourself and maybe Chris emailed about. But Ben, my colleague, I think, or Laura's got back to you to say that he'll get back to you on that point this week.
Lovely.
I appreciate that it's quite an urgent question.
Yeah. Thank you. Do we have any other queries or comments? And I'll just give a second or two for that, because I don't want to. I can give people back 5 minutes otherwise. I think there's been a huge amount to digest from Eleanor and from Charlotte, and also from Phil. And it may be that you want to take a bit of time to digest it and have further queries. We hope to make the video available shortly to those who have registered. If you have any further questions, any follow-up questions, or any comments on the webinar, please do let us know. I'd be really keen to hear, so please do contact your EMA Trade Association, that we will feed back to me. And we have a constant dialogue going with government on this issue. So as I say, if you've got further queries, please don't hesitate to raise them. But apart from that, if I could personally thank MTA for their back office support, but on behalf of everybody, thank all our guests. So Eleanor, Phil, Charlotte, and Terry from government. And I shall close the meeting if there are no further questions. Oh, there is one more question. I beg your pardon. Is it possible to send these slides, contacts, and links? Yes, that is our intention. So you should get them shortly. And if there are no other queries, then with thanks to everybody, I shall close the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks all. Bye.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.